The Neon Demon, directed by established provocateur Nicholas Winding Refn, was incredibly divisive when it premiered at Cannes Film Festival in 2016 and proved one of the biggest points of contention in film criticism that year. By far the most common criticism levelled against the film by professional critics and moviegoers alike was that it was too concerned with its aesthetic and not enough with its story and characters. In other words, what many people call style over substance. However, I often find myself taking issue with this phrase. The implication is that a film can easily be divided into these two categories, substance and style. Substance being the message or meaning behind it, and style being the techniques used to communicate said message. The reality is that in almost every film, style and substance are codependent, and maybe not even separable at all. If we take one of the most famous examples of a heavily stylized film, Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, we see discontinuous jump cuts, meandering dialogue scenes that don't move the plot forward in any way, fourth wall breaks, bizarre framing choices, and a handheld shooting style that was basically unheard of at the time. This might seem like nothing more than artistic indulgence, almost begging to be labelled style over substance, but Godard had a clear motivation for the techniques used in the film. They are a direct subversion of the traditional, supposedly bourgeois filmmaking techniques that dominated French cinema after the Second World War. Every unconventional shot of this film exists as a form of political resistance, blazing the trail for a new, egalitarian cinema in France. This political message is baked into every bizarre editing choice, every long tracking shot. In Breathless, and in countless other films, the message is contained within the style. The style is the substance. And I think the same can be said for the Neon Demon. Jessie is an aspiring model. She's only 16 years old, but has become estranged from her parents and fled to LA, which is where we first meet her. After the amateur photo shoot that opens the film, she meets Ruby, a makeup artist for both the living and the dead, who introduces her to models Sarah and Gigi at a party. As Jessie quickly rises through the ranks of the fashion world, Sarah and Gigi become increasingly jealous, envying that special something that she clearly has, but which nobody can quite put their finger on. Tensions build, and eventually, at the peak of her success, Jessie is killed and eaten by Ruby, Sarah and Gigi in an attempt to absorb some of her beauty. This is a film that is not very subtly criticising the shallowness of beauty, the destructive effects it has on those who become obsessed with it, and the horrifying lengths people will go to achieve it. And I think the strong stylistic choices made throughout are fundamental to communicating this message. Refn has always been obsessed with the aesthetic of his films, arguably more so than any other element, and The Neon Demon is no exception. The plot itself is very basic, and there is a lot of screen time dedicated to shots that linger on, seemingly just so we can admire how pretty they are. And they are very pretty, thanks to the extremely talented cinematographer Natasha Breyer. Throughout the film, it often seems like this strong visual approach is more important to Refn than its characters. The performance are generally quite stilted, and dialogue is either totally inconsequential plot-wise or incredibly heavy-handed, not to mention consistently very dull.
So, what do you think? I think that I wish I had your hair. Is this your natural color? You're just so beautiful. Don't you think that she's just perfect? Is that your real nose?
Yeah.
God, life is so unfair.
The priority that high-impact visuals take over all else in the film is something that many have called style over substance. But as we discussed earlier with Breathless, there are many cases in which the seemingly unnecessary stylistic elements of a film are actually key to delivering the intended message. In his review of The Neon Demon, Mark Kermode described Refn as someone driven by an intoxication with the superficiality of the photographic image. I think he probably could have worded that better, but you get the idea. Not only is the superficial nature of photography made clear within the events of the film, it's an idea that is baked into the visual style itself. The way that Refn and Breyer prioritise high-impact, highly superficial visuals above all else resembles the shallowness of the film the world is set in. What better way to portray a world that cares about nothing other than appearance than to make your film with the very same attitude? LA is completely superficial. Since the birth of Hollywood, people have been making films about how despite its glamorous exterior, the city of angels is rotten to the core. Surely, making a film with this same excess of superficiality is the ultimate way of communicating such an idea. I don't think it's a coincidence that in the opening scene, the camera of the character Dean becomes indistinguishable from the camera the film is being shot with. We are placed inside the gaze of a photographer who is capturing for himself the same superficial, stylized images that the film is made of. The link between the visual style of the film and the attitudes of the world it is portraying are established from the get-go. This opening has no real strong narrative purpose, which leads me to believe it exists primarily as a way for Refn to establish the lens, literally, that he wants us to interpret the neon demon through. Mirrors are hugely prominent throughout the film. They're practically hung out of the woodwork, and without rewatching the whole thing, I would guess that there is probably at least one mirror featured in every scene. Mirrors, particularly in the context of the modelling industry, connote superficiality, shallowness, and obsession with beauty. They are the one way that each and every one of us is able to make judgments about our own appearance. There is a level of artificiality to every mirror. Your reflection is not you, it's an illusion. A mirror contains nothing more than an approximation of your physical appearance, not your entire identity and sense of self. Including them as props so frequently and obviously encourages to consider the separation between the self and the image representation of the self. They are not the same thing. One is real and one is artificial, yet a world obsessed with beauty and appearance does not allow you to believe this. Here, the superficiality of the image is made clear yet again. It's also worth briefly mentioning the film's place in the exploitation genre. Refn has long been fascinated with exploitation films, and has made it his mission to restore many forgotten gems of the genre, as well as write books about them. Most of his works can be viewed as glossy and modern examples of exploitation films, and The Neon Demon, with its shockingly gruesome ending and its highly controversial scene featuring Jenna Malone and a corpse, is no exception. The exploitation genre is one that thrives not on meaningful messages or poetic experiences. It thrives on high-impact, transgressive imagery, and often employs quite a predatory gaze towards its female subjects to achieve this. If we are to view The Neon Demon as a post-exploitation film of sorts, we could say that while it employs a strong male gaze throughout, it also interrogates it by drawing attention to the superficial and exploitative nature of this very gaze. This is quite a tenuous point, especially since Nicholas Winding Refn is decidedly not a feminist, and Natasha Breyer literally said he's got a very objectifying, masculine gaze in this movie. But it's worth considering how the film's critique of, and usage of, superficial imagery fits in here. So there we have it. Style over substance, in my opinion, is not a very constructive term to use when talking about films that take a strong aesthetic approach. Whether it's The Neon Demon, Breathless, or something else, the next time you watch a film, think about how the strong stylistic choices being made might have a message to communicate on their own. Thanks for watching.